Goddess, there is a student named Mi, a native of Fujian province, whose name and place of origin have been forgotten by the person who wrote this story. When Mr. Meeson once happened to go to the county town and passed a market drunk, he was surprised to hear the thunderous chorus of drumming from a large door. He asked the locals and replied that the family was having a birthday party, but inside, it's quiet. Listen again. The song is loud and loud. When Mi was drunk and longing, he bought a birthday gift on the street without asking what kind of family he was, and threw a famous post about his later life inside the door. One man, dressed in plain clothes, asked, "What kind of relative are you to this old man?" Mi Sheng told him, "Not a relative." The man said, "This is a passerby who lives here temporarily. I don't know what kind of senior official this is. It's very rich and distinguished. He's not a relative. What's your picture?" Mr. Meeson heard that he regretted it, but that the post was already in. Before long, two teenagers had gone out to greet the guests, dressed in dazzling clothes, poised and elegant, and respectfully invited Mi Sheng into the house. When Mi Sheng came indoors, he saw an old man sitting south, with several tables of wine tables lined up on both sides of the room, and 6 or 7 guests, all of whom looked like rich children. When he saw Mi Sheng, all of them stood up and saluted, and the old man also stood up with a cane. Mr. Mi Sheng stood for a while to chat with Mr. Wang, who did not leave his seat. "My father is too old to perform," the teenagers said in an officious voice. "We, brother and father, thank you for your kindness." Mr. Meeson thanked him humbly, adding a table next to the old man. "Not long, there's a woman down there playing. Behind the wine table are glazed screens to shield the inside." At this point, the drumming, the blushing, the loud music makes it impossible for the guests to talk. At the end of the banquet, the 2 teenagers stood up, each taking a glass of wine that could hold 3 fights. When Mi Sheng looked at it, he was hard to look at it, but he had to drink with the other guests. And after a while, he tried for cups of advice, and the main guests drank all of them. "I had to drink as much as I had to." When the teenager poured it again, Misao felt so drunk that he stood up to say goodbye and insisted on pulling his clothes to keep him away. The rice was so drunk that she fell to the ground. Drunk, someone sprayed his face with cold water, woke up confused, stood up and looked away, only a teenager to give him an arm, and left home. Later, the Wang family moved out after passing by the door. On his return from the county seat, Mr. Meeson went to the street market once, and one man emerged from the liquor store to greet him for a drink. Misaki looked at the man and didn't know him. Thought, "Let's go inside." Inside, Bao Zhuang, who meets Tong Village, has already sat there. When Mr. Mi asked the man's name, who knew his surname, to be polished in the city, he asked strangely, "How do you know me?" Zhu asked, "Did you know the guy who was holding his birthday the other day?" "I don't know him," Mr. Meeson replied. "I used to come in and out of his house, and I knew him best," explained Zhu. "Old Wang, surnamed Fu, but I don't know who the province is or what the officials are." "Sir, I was there when you went to live, so I knew you." The 3 drank until evening. That night, Bao Zhuang suddenly died on the road. Bao Zhuang's father, who did not know his surname, insisted that Mi Sheng had killed his son, and that Mi Sheng had been sentenced to death for murder after Bao Zhuang was found to have been seriously injured. Because Mr. Zhu's last name had not been captured, the government could not confirm that Mr. Mi Sheng had killed him and sent him to prison. After more than a year, he made a direct tour of the place, and the visit found out that Mi Sheng was wrongly accused. When he returned home, Mi Sheng's family fortune was wiped out and his reputation erased. Mi Sheng thinks he is wrongly wronged and hopes to seek to recover his reputation. "So I brought Li to Koreatown." As it was getting dark, Meeson, exhausted and unable to walk any further, sat on the side of the road. "I saw a little car coming, 2 young women following me. The car was gone, and I heard someone pull over, and I didn't know what to say." "Are you me?" Miss Mi said. Mi stood up in shock and said yes. "How could you be so poor?" She sighs. Mi Sheng told her why. She asked him where he was going again, and Mi Sheng told me. She went back to the car and said something, and then she came back and asked me to come to the car. He looked away from the car with a pair of tiny, slender hands and pulled the curtains of his car and saw a brilliant woman sitting in it. "You've been wrong so badly," the woman told Mr. Meeson. "It's deplorable to hear. You can't go in and out without your hands. There's nothing for you on the way," he says, picking a beaded flower from a hairdo and handing it to Miss Sheng. "This can sell 100 gold, please hide it." I was about to ask the girl's family number, and the car was running away, and I didn't know who she was. Holding the beads, Mr. Me ponders and sees the jewels adorned on them. And like anything ordinary, he treasures to hide and keeps on going. In the county, he filed an appeal and extorted money from the imperial court. Rice brought out the beads and couldn't bear to give them away, so he came back. Since then, Miss Sheng has lived with his sister-in-law. Luckily, my brother was more virtuous, managed his livelihood and, although poor, was able to study. In another year, Miss Sheng went to Guangxing to test his children and stumbled into the mountains. It's Qingming Festival, and there's a lot of people touring the mountains. A few women came on horseback, including the jolly girl in last year's car. When the girl saw Miss Sheng, she stopped and asked him where he was going. Miss Sheng said the reason, and the girl asked, "Haven't you recovered your credit name yet?" Misson pointedly takes the flower out of his clothes. Can't bear to lose it, so it's still a child's life. The girl's face turned red. After that, Mr. Me was told to sit on the side of the road and wait, and walk slowly on his own horse. A long time later, a woman scampered around to give a package to Miss Sheng, saying, "Madam has a word," now learning to keep the door like a marketplace for business. Public bribery. 200 silver for your reputation. Meeson tweeted, "I've been given so much blessing by the lady that I think it's easy to test for a show with my talent. I can't accept so much money. Just tell her name, draw a portrait, burn incense, and be satisfied." The girl wouldn't listen. She put the package on the floor and laughed. Miss Sheng has been used for a long time, but he is not willing to go to Pak Kok Kok for the sake of his fame. He finally finished first in county school. He will give the silver the girl gave to his brother. "I'm good at making money. I've been back to my old job for 3 years. At that time, Min's Hong patrolman was the protege of Mi Sheng's ancestors and took good care of Mi Sheng. The brothers became rich and rich, but Masaki was always clean and honest, and despite being a great official, he never asked for a visit for fame and fortune. One day, a guest dressed in a fur coat and rode a fat horse to Mi Sheng's door, without anyone in the family. When Mi Sheng showed up, it turned out to be Mr. Fu. "Please come in and complain." Mi Sheng prepares a drink and treat. The guests were too busy pushing, but they didn't say anything. When the cabbage was served, Mr. Fu asked to speak to Mr. Me alone. Inside, Mr. Fu fell to the ground and Mr. Meeson asked, "What is it?" "My father just suffered a big disaster and wanted to help Taiwan," Mr. Fu said sadly. "My brother can't do this, although he has known me for generations. Troubling people with personal matters is the last thing I want to do in my life." As Mr. Fu lay on the ground crying and begging, Mr. Me put his face down and said, "It's just a relationship between me and Mr. Fu. How can we force others to forfeit the festival?" Mr. Fu was so humbled and indignant. He got up and laughed. The next day, Miss Sheng was sitting alone at home when a woman in blue walked in. "Look at that. It's the one the Fukayama girl gave her silver. Have you forgotten that flower?" She scolded when Mr. Meeson got up in shock. "How dare you? I can't forget," Mr. Meeson said. Hastily, she added, "Mr. Fu, who came yesterday, is the mother's brother." "It's hard for me to believe," pretended Meeser, who said, "If I say it myself, I'd jump in the oil pan, otherwise I wouldn't dare to be ordered to do it." The girl listened and went out on a horse. Zhang Ming, the woman, came back, knocked on the door and said, "Here comes the lady." The girl went indoors, crying and not saying a word. "If it wasn't for Mama, who would I be today?" "What orders? How dare you listen?" The woman cries. People who ask for help often look down on them, and people who ask for help often fear them. I've been running around in the middle of the night, and I've never had this kind of pain in my life. Just because I'm afraid of people. What else to say? I didn't immediately say yes because I was afraid I would miss the opportunity to see you again, Mr. Meeson said. It's my fault that you've suffered late at night. He said he was pulling the girl's sleeve, but he was groping her. The girl is furious, yelling, "You're not a decent person. I don't think of the blessings I gave you, but I want to take advantage of them. I've got the wrong person. I've got the wrong person. I'm furious. I'm getting in the car and I'm leaving." After Meeson rushed out to apologize, kneeling to stop her, the woman spoke on the side, and the woman lightened her anger, telling Meeson in the car, "I'm not a human being. I'm a goddess. My father, Nanyu Duli, accidentally offended the magistrate and immediately appealed to the emperor for punishment. Without the official seal of the local patrolman, I cannot be rescued. If you don't forget my past kindness, use a piece of yellow paper to strike me a letter." When we were done, the car left. Meeson returned to the house and was terrified and sweaty, so the fake exorcism is printed to the patrolman. Patrolmen felt that the exorcism was like cunning witchcraft and disagreed with the loaning of the seal. Misheng bribed his patron with a large sum of money, and his confidant promised to print it, but he never found a chance. After Misheng returned, she waited at the door, and Misheng told her in detail. She left quietly, complaining that Misheng had not done her best. "Go back and tell the lady, if it doesn't work out, I'll sacrifice my life." When he got home, Mr. Meeson tossed around all night wondering what to do about it. As it happens, a spoiled concubine on the tour buys the beads, and Misaki presents them. Concubine loved it. She stole the print to make Misaki. Miso is busy carrying the printed yellow paper into his arms and returning home. "Just in time. Luckily I failed my mission," says Mr. Meeser triumphantly, "but what I had been willing to sell for years when I was poor and cheap is now discarded for its owner." So I told her how to change the beads for the letters and said, "I'm sorry to throw away the gold. Please give me a message to the girl, but the beads are going to pay me again." A few days later, Mr. Fu came to the door to show his thanks and drop off the golden ounce. "I did it because Ling Mei had selflessly helped me, Mr. Meeson said ruefully. "Otherwise, even if you take 10,000 gold dollars, how can you get a reputation and a reputation?" After Mr. Fu repeatedly asked to take it, Mr. Me became angry and Mr. Fu had to go, saying, "This can't just be over." And the next day, she gave 300 pearl beads, and she said, "This is enough to pay for your beads, right? I value that flower, not these precious jewels," says Mr. Meeson. "If I had been given a treasure worth thousands of dollars, I would have sold it to become a rich man. I hide the beads so valuably that I'll be poor. For what? I'm a goddess, and I can't have any other hope. I'm so lucky to be able to repay 1 in 10,000 of the blessings that I received from the goddess." She put Mingju on the case file, and Mi Sheng paid her respects and returned it to her. A few days later, Mr. Fu arrived again. Mr. Fu asked his servant to leave the kitchen and cook for himself. The two sat opposite each other, drinking and cheering, like family. One guest tried a rice wine from Mi Sheng, and Mr. Fu thought it was delicious. He drank hundreds of glasses and his face turned slightly red. "You are an upright and decent person. Our brother didn't know you sooner. It's better than my sister's eyes. My father appreciates your kindness, can't repay it, wants to license your little sister to you, and worries that you're disgusted by your isolation. I'm surprised and delighted. I don't know what to say. Tomorrow night is the 9th day of July, and the crescent and the star of the hook will appear at the same time. The Vega star will marry a girl, and it will be the auspicious time of the morning, and the green cliff will be ready," Mr. Fu said. The next night, the goddess was delivered. The wedding was a treat, and everything was just like everyone else. 3 days later, the goddess gave Mishap's sister-in-law and the family's servants and mistresses to each other. And the sister-in-law was the most virtuous in her temperament, like a mother-in-law. "It's just a couple of years of childbirth. I tell Mr. to take his concubine. Mr. won't take it." It happened that Misheng's brother was in business in Jiangsu and Zhejiang and bought Misheng a concubine. The concubine, Dr. Ku, is a beautiful woman, and the Milsons love her. The goddess sees a concubine with a flower on it, much like the old one. "Take it off and look. It's great." When asked about the provenance of the flower, The concubine replied, after the death of a visiting concubine, her maid embezzled the flower and sold it. My father-in-law thought it was cheap and bought it. I saw it very much. My father had no son, only a daughter, and I wanted something that I could not get. Then my father died and the house was in decline, and I was placed in the home of an old woman named Gu. Gu was my aunt's son. After seeing the flowers, I tried to sell them again and again. I went to the well to find my death. I firmly disagreed, and then I was able to save them to the present. It's not natural that what was 10 years ago should still be returned to the old owners, the Mishims lamented. The goddess took out another pearlescent and said, "This thing has been duplicated for a long time. Give the concubines both, and insert them into her hair." Concubine, get out and ask everyone about the goddess's family. Everyone in the family is shy about talking. I don't see Mama being human, concubine told Misan. There's a fascination in her eyebrows. When I put flowers on yesterday, I looked from a distance and thought she was born with beauty and came from a muscle. Unlike the average person, who just looks good with her eyebrows. Mr. Misan smiled and was not in denial. Concubine said, "Don't say, I'll try her. If she's a goddess, if anyone asks for anything, she'll know when no one asks for her." The god's socks are beautiful and concubine loves them, but I can't say, so I burned incense and prayed in the boudoir. The goddess gets up in the morning and suddenly lifts up the sewing box to pick up a pair of embroidered socks for her to give to the concubine. Misan saw it and couldn't help but laugh. When asked by the goddess, Miso told me about the concubine. The goddess also laughed and scolded. What a cunning groom, but because of the concubine's cleverness, I'm more in love with her. The more deferential I am, the more I am soaked in the incense, the more I am tidy. And I am going to see the goddess. After I gave birth to 2 sons, the Milsons named each other. By the time me was 80, the goddess was as young as a teenager. When me became ill, the goddess brought in a carpenter to make a coffin twice as big as a normal one. After me Shiro died, the goddess didn't cry. The family went out and came back to find the goddess dead in the coffin, and they were buried. So far, so-called Utsuka has been circulating.
Alright, this story has come to an end. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you.